Helga Bauer, a lonely 72-year-old widow, opened her door to Emir, a Turkish refugee who claimed to have lost everything, only to discover too late that the man she sheltered was not searching for safety, but for his next victim. Helga Bauer had lived in her small German town all her life. The red brick house on the corner of Lindenstrasse had been her home for over 40 years, first with her husband and later, after his passing, on her own. Her days were quiet, predictable, and filled with small routines that gave her comfort. She would rise early, brew strong coffee, and sit by the kitchen window watching the street wake up. Neighbors knew her as the woman with the neatly trimmed rose garden and the warm smile. Though she was kind to everyone, Helga often felt the sting of loneliness in the evenings when silence filled the rooms where laughter once lived. The news of refugees arriving in Germany stirred something in her heart. On television, she saw families huddled in camps, children clutching worn toys, and young men standing uncertainly in long lines for aid. She thought of her own father, who had once fled war during his youth, and how strangers had helped him survive. Those memories sparked a sense of duty. If she had space in her home, why should it remain empty when someone else could use it? Friends and neighbors advised her to be cautious. Some muttered that refugees brought trouble, that they were not to be trusted. Helga refused to believe that kindness should ever come with suspicion. She argued that people in need deserved compassion, not judgment. To her, offering shelter was not just charity, it was the right thing to do. With a quiet determination, she prepared her spare room, placing fresh linens on the bed and a vase of flowers on the small nightstand. She told herself that soon, someone who had lost everything might find comfort here. For the first time in years, her house no longer felt like it belonged only to the past. One icy evening in late December, Helga heard a knock at her door. She hesitated at first, as she rarely had visitors after dark, but when she opened it, she found a young man standing in the cold, his breath visible in the frosty air. He introduced himself as Emir, a 28-year-old Turkish refugee. His clothes were worn and thin for the winter, his shoes scuffed, and his hands trembling from the chill. There was a look in his eyes, part exhaustion, part desperation, that stirred something deep in Helga's heart. Without a second thought, she invited him inside, guiding him to the warmth of her kitchen. As he sat at her table, Emir explained that he had fled conflict, leaving behind family and friends. His words were halting, sprinkled with emotion, and though his German was broken, the pain in his voice was unmistakable. Helga poured him soup, and he ate slowly at first, then hungrily, as though he had not tasted a proper meal in weeks. She watched him closely, moved by the vulnerability of someone so young, so far from home. That night, she showed him the spare room she had prepared. The gratitude in his face seemed genuine, his eyes watering as he thanked her repeatedly. Helga reassured herself that she had done the right thing, offering him not only a place to sleep, but a sense of safety. The house, once filled only with her solitary footsteps, now carried the sound of another's presence. As she lay awake in bed, Helga felt a cautious hopefulness. Perhaps this young man's arrival was not just chance. Perhaps fate had given her a way to fill the emptiness of her home and heart. She had no idea how deeply this decision would change her life. In the first weeks, Emir behaved like the perfect guest. He rose early, kept his room tidy, and often insisted on helping Helga with chores. He carried heavy groceries, swept the porch, and even repaired a squeaky door that had annoyed her for years. Helga found comfort in his presence, a sense of companionship that softened the edges of her loneliness. She began to enjoy cooking meals again, setting the table for two instead of one, and hearing another voice echo through the rooms. But slowly, subtle changes appeared. Emir no longer kept to himself. He began lingering in the kitchen while she cooked, watching her closely, complimenting her on how youthful she looked or how much her kindness meant to him. At first, Helga dismissed these remarks as simple gratitude, but soon they became more personal. He would sit beside her rather than across the table, sometimes brushing her hand as he reached for the salt. His eyes lingered longer than she expected, his smile carrying an intensity that unsettled her. When neighbors stopped by, Emir showed a possessive streak, always appearing at Helga's side, answering questions before she could. He made himself indispensable, yet his constant closeness felt strangely deliberate. Though part of her worried, another part quietly enjoyed the attention. Years of silence had worn her down, and now, here was a young man treating her as though she mattered again. Helga tried to ignore the whispers of doubt in her mind, convincing herself that Emir was only being kind. Yet late at night, when she thought of the way he looked at her, she felt a flutter of confusion she couldn't quite name. What had begun as an act of compassion was slowly becoming something far more complicated. The atmosphere in Helga's home shifted quickly from companionship to something that felt like romance. Emir's gestures grew bolder. He began bringing her small gifts, wildflowers from the roadside, chocolate bars he claimed were just for her. Even a scarf he said reminded him of his mother. His words dripped with admiration, telling her she was strong, beautiful, and unlike any woman he had ever known. Helga, flustered but secretly pleased, found herself softening to the idea that maybe their bond was something extraordinary. Soon, Emir began weaving the idea of love into their daily conversations. He told Helga that age meant nothing to him, that kindness and loyalty mattered more than years. He spoke as if their meeting was destiny, as though he had been guided to her door for a reason. Helga, starved for affection since her husband's death, wanted to believe him. Against her better judgment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was no longer alone. The shift grew stronger when Emir suggested they should share everything like a family. He pressed her to open a joint bank account, explaining that it would make life easier, that he could contribute his earnings once he found work. At first, Helga hesitated, knowing money was no trivial matter. But Emir's persistence was gentle, coated in affection and promises. Eventually, she gave in, convincing herself that love required trust. For the first time in years, Helga felt cherished. The loneliness that once weighed heavily on her shoulders seemed to fade. Yet beneath the warmth of flowers and tender words, there lurked a quiet unease she chose to ignore. What felt like love was moving quickly, almost too quickly, but Helga clung to the hope that happiness had finally returned to her life. It was only a matter of time before small cracks began to show in Emir's carefully painted picture. Helga first noticed it when a necklace her husband had given her went missing from its place in the jewelry box. She searched the house for days, convincing herself she had misplaced it, but the truth nagged at her. Around the same time, she saw unusual withdrawals from the new joint account, amounts larger than anything she had ever spent. When she asked Emir about them, his eyes filled with tears, and he spoke of a sick sister in Turkey who needed medicine. His story was heartbreaking, and his voice carried such emotion that Helga forced herself to believe him. Neighbors, however, whispered in tones she could not ignore. They mentioned seeing unfamiliar men visiting her house late at night, slipping in and out quietly when they thought no one was watching. Others claimed they had seen Emir using multiple phones, speaking in a language Helga could not understand. When she cautiously asked him about the visitors, he dismissed it with ease, saying they were old friends who had also fled hardship. He reassured her that nothing was wrong, wrapping his arms around her shoulders until her doubts dissolved. Still, a quiet worry grew inside her. Jewelry continued to disappear one piece at a time, and each time, Emir had an explanation ready. The withdrawals grew larger, with promises that it was all temporary, that he would repay everything once his family was safe. Helga wanted desperately to trust him, yet a shadow of fear crept into her heart. Somewhere deep down, she sensed that the man she had welcomed with kindness might not be the helpless refugee she believed him to be. One gray February morning, Helga woke to an unsettling silence. The usual sounds of Emir moving about the house were gone. She called his name, but there was no answer. His bedroom door stood open, the bed neatly made, the closet stripped bare. Every trace of his belongings had vanished overnight. Panic swept through her as she hurried to the kitchen, where the joint bank account documents had been left in a drawer. She logged in and felt her knees weaken. The balance was zero. Every cent she had entrusted to him was gone. Her jewelry box, once filled with cherished pieces collected over a lifetime, was nearly empty. The gold chain from her wedding, her mother's brooch, the diamond ring passed down through generations, all gone. The house that had once felt full of life now seemed gutted, hollowed out by betrayal. Helga collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling, the truth sinking in with brutal clarity. When she contacted the police, their investigation revealed a devastating reality. Emir was no refugee at all. His identity papers were forged, his refugee story a rehearsed lie. Authorities uncovered that he was part of a criminal network specializing in romance and trust scams, targeting elderly women across Europe. Each detail she had once believed, the sister in need, the visitors at night, the desperate past, had been nothing more than a performance. The officers assured her she was not the only victim, but the words offered little comfort. Helga's kindness had been weaponized against her, her loneliness exploited with precision. The man she thought she had saved had vanished into the shadows, leaving her with nothing but a fractured heart and the unbearable weight of humiliation. The days after Emir's disappearance dragged on in a haze of disbelief and shame. Helga could hardly bring herself to step outside. The whispers of neighbors seemed louder than ever, carrying judgment and pity in equal measure. Some called her foolish for trusting a stranger, others offered sympathy, but their eyes betrayed quiet amusement at her misfortune. Each look felt like a reminder that she had been deceived not just financially, but emotionally. The financial loss was devastating. Her savings, carefully built over decades, were gone. With her pension alone, she struggled to pay bills and feared she might lose the home she had once opened in generosity. But worse than the money was the emptiness he left behind. Emir had filled her days with warmth, attention, and the illusion of love. Now the silence returned, heavier and colder than before, but this time it carried the sting of betrayal. Helga replayed every moment in her mind, punishing herself for the signs she had ignored: the missing jewelry, the late-night visitors, the relentless requests for money. Each memory cut deeper, reminding her of her vulnerability. Nights were the hardest. She lay awake, unable to stop hearing his words, the affectionate tones that now felt poisoned. She withdrew from the church community, unable to face their pity. Even simple tasks like shopping became unbearable when she imagined the shopkeepers gossiping about her. The once strong woman who had believed in compassion now felt broken, stripped of both dignity and trust. Emir had not only stolen her possessions, he had taken the fragile hope she had clung to in her later years. What remained was a hollow ache, a wound that seemed unlikely to heal. Months passed before Helga found the strength to speak openly about what had happened. At first, she wanted to bury the shame, to let the story fade into silence. But the weight of it grew unbearable, and she realized that hiding her pain only gave more power to those who preyed on people like her. With quiet determination, she began sharing her experience with community groups and local newspapers, warning others about the dangers of love scams. She admitted her mistakes openly, not to seek pity, but to ensure that no one else would fall into the same trap. Though Emir was never caught, police confirmed that similar scams were spreading across Europe, targeting the elderly who lived alone. Her testimony helped investigators understand how these criminals operated, and her courage gave other victims the strength to come forward. Slowly, Helga began to see her story not only as one of loss, but also as a tool to protect others. She rebuilt her daily life piece by piece, returning to her garden and the routines that had once brought her peace. The roses bloomed again, their petals bright against the backdrop of her modest home, reminding her that even after the harshest winters, beauty could return. She no longer trusted as easily as she once did, but she carried her scars as lessons rather than curses. In the end, Helga's life was changed forever, not by the man she welcomed in, but by the strength she found after his betrayal. Her story remains a haunting reminder that even the purest acts of kindness can be twisted by those who seek to exploit them. Yet in choosing to speak out, Helga transformed her pain into a warning and a legacy of resilience.